Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the first annual Transit Operations Conference that the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium, CUTRIC, is proudly hosting here today. My name is Parvati Pillai and I work as a program manager for ZIP Consulting Services and Business Development at CUTRIC. Today, we have an interesting panel on the hydrogen fuels and electric bus, the opportunity unrealized for Canada's transit context. If you were listening to the presentations at this conference today, some of them were more or less talking about hydrogen. There is funding, there is potential feasibility studies, there is potential opportunities for hydrogen bus deployment, and we are not yet realizing that potential. What is lacking? How do we get ahead with hydrogen technology? Although, as you may have heard from the manufacturers this morning, we are more or less leading in the space in terms of technology elsewhere globally. So we are here to find out right from the leaders. I have the pleasure of inviting Ms. Erin Cook, Project Manager, Bus Electrification Program at Winnipeg Transit. Welcome, Erin. Ms. Jane Sullivan, Grants and Governmental Affairs Director, Champaign-Urbana, Mass Transit District. Welcome, Jane. Ms. Kristen Wasinski, Director of Planning at Riverside Transit Agency. Welcome, Kristen. And Ms. Cliff Thorne, Director of Maintenance and Motorist Services, Orange County Transportation Authority. Right, I see you there, Kristen, and I see Chris. Okay, all right, everyone is here. So thank you so much, dear panelists, once again for joining me at this session. I will be your moderator for the session, but before we dive into the Q&A session, which our audience are looking forward to, and the discussions that follow, I do want to set the context and request each one of you to present a short presentation on your insights here. Could I turn to you, Erin, first for your presentation, and then we would start with the Q&A after.
Of course. Thank you so much for introducing me, Parvati. I'm Erin Cook, as you've introduced me already. I'm Project Manager for Bus Electrification. And I'm here to give you a little bit of background on our project that we have in development currently. So Winnipeg Transit is a mid-sized transit agency in Canada. So we have a total of about 640 buses today, predominantly 40-foot buses with a few smaller buses and a growing sized fleet of 60-foot buses as well. Our challenges for electrification are our temperature here. We are a very cold climate in the winter and a fairly hot climate in the summer, which gives us a good range of temperatures that we have to work with on the HVAC side and range challenges. We are a little bit unique here in that we do all of our maintenance ourselves in-house, which does make our savings on the maintenance of battery electric buses a little bit smaller than some transit agencies that outsource. But we currently are looking at expanding our fleet and expanding our service and doing a network realignment that will transform our system over the next few years and hopefully increase ridership, and particularly with challenges due to COVID. So the majority of my time here has been spent on our transition to zero emission technical report, which was just completed and released in February. And this was really looking at current state of technology, doing a technology comparison, a cost and operational evaluation. And this report was really focused on selecting what our fleet mix might look like going forward and what we should be including in our pilot test fleet. And then the next phase of our study here is the ZEB rollout plan, which is really our long-term forecast for how do we transition our fleet, what does our fleet mix look like, what's our infrastructure procurement schedule, and really working with utilities and our workforce development for our long-term plan. For our pilot in particular, we've discovered that zero emission buses are not a one-for-one replacement for diesel in all applications. In our case in particular, our weekend runs are very, very long. So there was a significant number of routes that can't be reached with the range limitations of current technologies. And each technology had kind of a pro and con for various different situations within our transit agency. So we found that depot charging is fairly inexpensive and works really well for high frequency, but the shortened range of them, even with the largest battery packs, is still not sufficient, and particularly with the 60-foot buses. En route buses was great for meeting our range requirements, but we have a requirement for our 60-foot buses again to have high frequency service, and the 5 to 10-minute charging cycles required for those buses wasn't adequate for meeting our schedules without increasing our fleet size. And then hydrogen fuel cell buses are really the happy spot that have both high frequency transit and long length runs throughout the day, but the problem is the cost of hydrogen is a bit challenging. So we felt that all technologies had a strength in certain applications, and we previously tested en route charging. So we decided for our next phase of electrification to include long range options of both fuel cell and battery electric. And then at the conclusion of that test, we'll have data on all 3 technologies and determine what our mix should be going forward. So we have a few challenges here. There's been several announcements on funding for zero emission buses in Canada, but that's not in the budget right now. So we're still monitoring ways that we can fund the difference between a zero emission bus and a diesel bus in our case. The other, pro and con of zero emission transit is it gives us an ability to relook at optimizing our fleet mix based on putting the right bus on the right route. So, but that means that we're also going to be managing multiple procurements over the next few years when we're used to only working with maybe 1 procurement a year or 1 SR. And of course, we're going to have all these infrastructure projects for chargers and fuel stations along that. And then the other challenges come to figuring out what do we have for power, where are we getting our fuel from, how are we going to fuel these buses. So outdoor fueling is good for a pilot, but doesn't really work for a large fleet. So these are all extra costs that we're going to have to look at. And then we're looking at in our pilot basically to really evaluate all the technologies. So the cost of fuel, cost of electricity, and really the cost of operational challenges, which isn't really easy to figure out on a study, that you really have to put buses on the road to understand your operational challenges and the cost of change. And that's a brief introduction to Winnipeg Transit, and I look forward to speaking and answering your questions a little bit later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. You packaged the problem like in a nutshell, the range, cold climate, frequency, you have it all, right? So it presents a complex problem, but resolving it, can be really, really meritorious for us. Thank you so much, Erin, for sharing your insights here. We would like to move to our next panelist. I would like to welcome Ms. Jane Sullivan, Grants and Governmental Affairs Director at Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District. Jane, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, I will dive right in because I know I only have a few minutes. I'll tell you a little bit about our mass transit district. So we're in the Midwest United States, in central Illinois. Our transit agency provides about 12 to 13 million rides a year pre-pandemic. We've got a fleet of about 114 buses. Most of those are diesel electric hybrid buses. We have a few older diesel buses that we're just about getting ready to replace. Champaign-Urbana is a college town, so we're home to the University of Illinois main campus. So we have pretty heavy and frequent service on U of I campus. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about our hydrogen project. We're right in the middle of it. So I can talk a little bit about the decision-making process when deciding to go with zero-emission buses and whether or not battery electric or fuel cell would be a better fit for us. We had 3 goals that we're working to accomplish with zero-emission buses. Of course, zero emissions and truly zero emission, and not just what comes out of the tailpipe, but also the energy source that's used to provide the fuel for the bus. And then really tied to that is reducing our fossil fuel consumption, of course. And then this last one is really the most important one, making sure we're having minimal operational impact. So the key here for us is we did not want to be in a situation where we had to change or design our route structure or our schedule vehicles around our vehicles. It's very important to us that we're designing our service around what our community wants and what our community needs. And in order to do that, we need buses that have a range similar to diesel and diesel electric hybrid buses. And right now, the battery electric bus doesn't work for us because of that. So that's part of our decision-making process. You can see on the right, I have a little bit of a timeline here. Again, we're right in the middle of this, this project. We park buses inside here in Illinois, and we have a full service maintenance garage. And so we needed, and like I said, we didn't have any CNG buses so we didn't have ventilation and detection like you need for CNG and hydrogen. So we've modified the facility, added the hydrogen detectors and such. That piece of the project is done, and we're ready to receive our buses any day now. We're getting two 60-foot fuel cell buses. They're just finishing up production now. These are the New Flyer Excelsior Charge H2. And a big piece of this project is our hydrogen production station. So we, like I mentioned earlier, it was important to us that these buses are truly zero emission, and so what worked best for us in order to achieve that is to produce hydrogen on site with an electrolyzer, and that hydrogen that electrolyzer will be powered by solar energy. We actually have some land just across the street from our facility where we're able to install solar arrays. So eventually that's what will power our hydrogen production station. You can see on the bottom of this slide, I listed some of our partners that we're working with on this project. And I'm just going to go to the last slide where we were asked to talk about some of the challenges of our project and of hydrogen fuel cell technology, and these all really blend together. As we all have heard today, the upfront cost of hydrogen vehicles is more expensive than battery electric. So that's definitely a challenge we have. When you start scaling into a larger fleet, it does start to look a lot better, and as supply and demand increases, we think that'll start to look better as well. One other thing I think worth mentioning is we've been talking to many people and would like to work together on the fueling infrastructure. We have had some challenges there in consistency of the different fueling infrastructures, excuse me. Like, for example, we want to encourage our community, like the local municipalities, to look into hydrogen vehicles as well. But you can't fuel the same. You can't fuel a bus with the same fueling station as you can, at least not right now, with a car because of the pressure differences. So that's a challenge we're seeing. And education and awareness is big here, of course, in all of these aspects. We really have seen battery electric buses getting a lot of the spotlight, and there's so much potential with fuel cell buses, and we find that, at least at this point, they meet our needs a lot better. And so raising that education and awareness is a challenge we're working on addressing. And I think I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. That's a really interesting presentation. I'm really thankful to you for sharing how you are using electrolytic hydrogen and that too electrolyzer powered by solar power. We would come back to that when we do the Q&A. Thank you so much for your presentation right now. I would like to welcome our next panelist, Ms. Kristen Wasinski, Director of Planning, Riverside Transit Agency, for your presentation. Kristen, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So my name is Kristen Wasinski. I'm the Director of Planning for Riverside Transit Agency, or RTA. We are a JPA made up of 22 member jurisdictions and the public transportation provider for Western Riverside County. We have a 2,500 square mile service area. It's the second largest in the United States. And during regular service pre-pandemic, we had 334 total vehicles when we're running full service. So RTA operates an entirely CNG fleet, and we have for a long time. We were one of the early adopters of CNG technology. However, CARB recently passed the Innovative Clean Transit, or ICT regulation, that you've heard mentioned throughout the day in this conference. And it requires all large transit agencies, including RTA, to transition to a zero-emission bus fleet by 2040. We were required to submit a rollout plan that detailed our path forward. And we did submit that to CARB in December, and it was approved. We received approval last month for that plan. You can see in the table on the screen kind of how the ICT regulation works for large transit agencies. So basically by 2023, when you cut your purchase order for new vehicles, 25% have to be zero emission. That's for any new vehicle purchase for your revenue fleet, and then it goes up from there. So in order to understand how this regulation would affect RTA, we commissioned Stantec, who partnered with CUTRIC, to do a study of our system. We knew that there were range limitations for zero-emission buses, and because of our large service area, we weren't exactly sure which technology would be appropriate or if it would be a mixed fleet that we would need. On the screen, you can see some of the energy consumption modeling that CUTRIC did for our study. Basically looking at how long these vehicles would last, taking RTA's actual blocks, so what a vehicle actually does during the day. Could be more than one route if there's interlining, but just to try to see how these vehicles would do. So for depot-only BEBs, battery electric buses, 72% of our blocks could be met on a medium duty cycle. Duty cycles have to do with a lot of different factors. I'm sure Josipa can name them all for you, but basically stops and starts of the vehicle, how many passengers you have could affect how heavy the vehicle is, if you're running the air or the heater all day. There's just a lot of different things that can affect your energy consumption, driver habits, stopping and starting a lot. So 72% for the depot-only charging BEBs, and if we did on-route charging, we could get 96%. However, in order to do on-route charging, we would have to deploy these chargers throughout our 22 different member jurisdictions, and it became pretty evident that RTA couldn't either afford to do that or figure out how that could be even feasible to put those all over our service area. And it wasn't cost effective. So it was going to either be depot only charging or hydrogen fuel cell. So we did also model the hydrogen fuel cell. We felt it important to look at all of the technologies that we were able to use under CARB's ICT regulation and make sure we understood them. And you can see here with hydrogen, we did hit 82% of our blocks, so 10% more than the depot only charging battery electric buses. So the only answer for RTA was basically we had to do a combination of depot battery electric buses and the fuel cell buses, or all fuel cells. From there, we looked at all the different cost considerations, infrastructure, fueling requirements, bus prices, and the list goes on of all the different things we tried to think about to make this decision. The cost of a mixed fleet versus an all hydrogen fleet was essentially the same. So we ended up deciding that we were going to recommend to our board to do hydrogen, because why have two technologies and have the limitations where the battery electric buses cannot complete the same routes as a hydrogen bus, and you would have to have dispatch monitoring which bus goes out on which route, and it just seemed complicated. Throw CNG in there because we'll have those for a while, and it was just too much. So considering that the cost difference was really nothing, we recommended, and the board did approve, a full hydrogen fleet. We did go ahead and cost out what it's going to look like to purchase an all hydrogen fleet versus replacing our current CNG fleet. So that's what this is right here. We wanted to make sure that we understood the cost implications for this. You can see it's a big difference. Capital costs, another $76 million over 20 years, and operating costs, another $50 million. On the operating side, the increased costs come from the cost of hydrogen versus CNG right now, where we get so many credits, we make money off of it. And then the insurance for hydrogen vehicles right now is actually very high. So those were the two main things that cost And then just really quickly, some next steps for us. We're going to identify funding for the actual design of our fueling infrastructure. We did identify where these facilities will go based on what we have right now. We do have conceptual plans, but we'll be doing design of that. Looking for partnerships for fueling. We need partnerships for this hydrogen fuel. UCR, University of California, Riverside is one that we're working with. Looking at restructuring some blocks and then identifying funding for our hydrogen vehicles. Thank you for having me.
It's our absolute pleasure to listen to you, Kristen. You showed how you make scientific decision-making possible, utilizing the merits of a feasibility study. Thank you for highlighting the CUTRIC study as well. It was our pleasure to collaborate with you. So thank you to Kristen. I do want to welcome our next panelist for the presentation. I would like to request Mr. Cliff Thorne, Director of Maintenance and Motorist Services, Orange County Transportation Authority, to deliver your presentation. Over to you, Cliff.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. My name is Cliff Thorne, as you just mentioned, from Orange County Transportation Authority, and I'll be giving you a kind of a high-level view of our hydrogen fuel cell program. But first, I'd like to give you a little overview of OCTA. We have a very unique service area in that we don't have one downtown area. We actually have, many. As if you're familiar with Orange County, there's Disneyland and there's a lot of theme parks, a lot of things going on. And as a result, our buses have to travel over 300. Many of them travel over 300 miles in a single day. And so it was important for us to look at very carefully what kind of zero emission technology we would implement. And I'll talk about that later. We have a budget of $1.5 billion. We offer a variety of services from regional planning to environmental programs. Our bus service makes up about 39% of our budget. We have 5 operating facilities. We have over 500 revenue vehicle buses. All of them, of course, are CNG. Many of them are equipped with CNG near zero engines. So OCTA has always been very forward thinking in terms of trying to reduce our emissions footprint. Now, the 37.5 million annual passenger miles, of course, because of COVID, that was pre-COVID. We're actually operating more around the 1.2 million revenue vehicle hours, but we're very hopeful and encouraged that this is going to come back very soon. So getting right into the hydrogen fuel cell pilot, this was based on a grant that we received from the California Air Resources Board and the South Coast Air Quality Management District. We were able to acquire 10 hydrogen fuel cell buses and 1 fueling station. Now the buses, the 10 buses are New Flyer buses, and they have the Ballard fuel cell. They meet all of the OCTA requirements. As you've heard from the other presentations, some of the battery electric buses can come up short when you're trying to put them into your service plan. Only about 20% of our routes are under 150 miles, which would really be ideal for a battery electric bus. But the hydrogen bus is really a one-for-one replacement with our CNG buses. Like I said, they have a 300-mile operating range. They refuel in the same amount of time, about 6 to 10 minutes. And these buses have been in service since February of 2020. So we have a year under our belt, and I always look at the first year, especially when it comes with new technology, that there's going to be bumps in the road. There's going to be fine-tuning that needs to be done, and that has been the case here, and it's been working pretty well so far. The availability of these buses has been almost 70%. We'd like to see them 80% or more. Our CNG buses are available 85% of the time, just to give you some context. The good news is that their miles per diesel gallon equivalent is pretty high. It's 9.56 the last time, well, the average for the year. And our fuel, although the fuel cost, you're going to hear this over and over again, is pretty high. It's 96 cents per mile. So that's pretty high. The maintenance cost has been okay. We expect actually the maintenance cost to go down a little bit, but we're at 56 cents per mile, and that's a little bit lower than what we pay for our CNG buses. So far they're going in the right direction. Our hydrogen fuel cell station, as far as I know, it's still the largest hydrogen fueling station in the U.S. For transportation. It has a capacity of 50 buses. and it's scalable to 100 with basically adding some fuel storage. Now, well, before I go to my final slide, I also wanted to mention that we are also procuring 10 40-foot electric buses. And our plan right now is to operate 10 electric, 10 hydrogen, and really get that operational experience to really understand, what the fleet mix should be. We also, as you heard from RTA, we also had a ZEB rollout plan created by Stantec and CUTRIC. And when we asked them we just want to know what's the lowest cost. Which one would what would the fleet mix look like if we're just operating based on cost? And it came out that about 97% of the buses would be hydrogen, just based on that. A big part of it was that the 300-mile range. That really helps us to replace buses 1-for-1 instead of 1.5 or 1.4% more buses. So with that, our goal is just like you heard from Kristen. We're under the California Air Resources Board ICT rule, and so we are our plan is to transition to zero emission fleet by 2040. But we're going to start with these 2 pilots, and we're in a unique position right now because we'll be able to operate these two pilots for about 9 years before we have to make a large vehicle purchase. So I think that we're in a good position to really understand these technologies and allow them to grow before we have to make a large purchase and maybe adjust our plan. Maybe we'll have more battery electric buses. We'll see. But same challenges as you've heard from the others is funding is a big one, energy availability, and then of course on the battery side we have the range issues. The technology is complex. However, the biggest problem that I see with the hydrogen is the fuel cost. So with that, I will close my comments.
Thank you so much, Cliff. And it's particularly interesting how you are still trying to diversify your fleet, and through pilot studies, you're trying to experientially collect that knowledge so that you can scientifically deploy your fleet and transition into whatever zero emission solution that is optimal for you. That's wonderful to hear. And thanks for highlighting the CUTRIC study as well. It was our pleasure to collaborate with you on that front. So thank you so much to all of our panelists for sharing your insights. Those presentations are really great and very, very much enlightening. I do want to invite you all back to our virtual stage here so that we can start our discussions, which our audience are looking forward to. I have received so many questions. I do not know whether I will be able to get through all of them, but I do want to start with an interesting question to you, Jane, because your point about the fact that you have an electrolyzer that is operational on solar power, is very interesting, as I said. And per my prediction, our audience are also asking, what if the sun is out? Like, what if you do not have solar power to power your electrolyzer to do what it needs to do? What is your backup?
Yeah, good. Thank you for the question. We do have 900 kilograms of storage in our station. We also are connected to the grid so that we can pull from the grid when needed, the electrical grid. I saw that someone asked a question about energy storage, and we don't have that planned right now, but could in the future. And we also do have, part of that person's question, we also do have some roof space to expand our solar array so that we can get even more solar energy. Right now, the solar array and the station will be built to, we think, power about 12 buses, and we're just starting with 2. So we have some time to scale up to that, and then we'll look towards expansion.
Mm-hmm. That's great to hear. So maybe if I could take a segue from the sunny landscape there in Illinois to the winters in Winnipeg here, and so what you suggested, the fueling station, the fueling indoors situation. What is your plan to mitigate the winters in Winnipeg with hydrogen fuel cell technology? What did your the strategy development and knowledge tell you about how would these buses manage winter?
In winter, we're expecting them to be better than the fuel cell buses. The fuel cell buses be better than the battery electric buses. Just the new buses do capture waste heat. So we are expecting to get some improved energy consumption on the fuel cell buses comparatively with no diesel heaters. The indoor fueling question for the pilot, we are looking at outdoor fueling. We've decided for, up to about 30 buses, we can brave the 2.5 hours outside on a day. But beyond that, we would want to convert our garage to indoor fueling. So we have had some discussions with our CNG partners, including Cliff, and as well as Calgary Transit, who has the largest indoor CNG fueling facility in North America. So in terms of reaching out with them to see what kind of synergies we can get between hydrogen and CNG for planning. So we do believe that we have a garage that could be converted just by putting up some firewalls and a retrofit. But basically, our plan at this point would be a new garage that we're planning would include provisions for indoor fueling. So potentially not having to retrofit our current garages and using that indoor fueling at a new location. But we are definitely looking at what options we have for conversion as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great to hear. Because you mentioned about the CNG fleet conversion, I do want to turn to you, Cliff, because from a CNG fleet to hydrogen, did you face any challenges? And what is that piece of advice that you would have for agencies who are transitioning from a diesel fleet to hydrogen? Should they go through the CNG route or should they go directly to hydrogen? What do you think?
Well, honestly, I think that CNG has proven to be very low emission, not zero, but in some cases near zero. So I still think that CNG is a viable option for cleaning up your fleet and lowering your footprint. I think it's harder, a little bit more challenging for someone going from a CNG fleet to completely to zero. For us in our workforce, it was much easier to learn a hydrogen bus. Coming from a CNG background, you have the high pressure tanks that are exactly the same. The fueling is the same. We're used to fueling with a cryogenic fuel. So a lot of those high pressure, a lot of those similarities kind of they transferred over to hydrogen. The only part we had to add, of course, is the battery part. And so we had to learn the high, 600 volts and above, arc flash, things like that. So I think the transition for us was easier because we went from CNG. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Oh, am I?
You were.
Can you hear me? Okay,
Now
great. All right. So thank you. So Kristen, could I turn to you because you highlighted the feasibility study that CUTRIC undertook for you. So there are a lot of transit agency colleagues out there who are still thinking whether they need to go the feasibility route, even if they are trying to pilot a couple of buses. Like, can they just go without a feasibility study? What would be your advice as an agency that have gone through like an extensive feasibility study to decide the pathway that you chose? What would be that advice that you would have? Is it worth to invest in a feasibility study that would tell you how to do it, or is it more favorable to just not do it?
Sure. So I think that depends on the situation. For us, it wasn't only looking at doing a pilot, but we have to convert our entire fleet. And because of our large service area, we needed to understand what the technologies would do in our service area. And so it was very important for us to have that energy consumption modeling and understand truly what the vehicle will do when it's on the road, because you get quoted the range, from OEMs, you might be told that it has a certain range, and then you get out there, and we've heard it over and over again in California, and it doesn't behave exactly how it was promoted to behave. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of factors that go into why range limitations can have to be adjusted. And so for us, we needed that. I think if you're just doing a pilot program for a couple of buses, as long as you were sure that the route you were putting them on, that they weren't going to die or not be able to provide service, you probably would be okay. But for us, it was a much bigger project, and we had to understand holistically how it was going to do throughout our service area.
That's an important insight because many agencies are considering which pathway to choose. But thank you for sharing that insight there, Kristen. Jane, could I come back to you because I'm still at the electrolyzer there that you highlighted, because usually with the U.S. transit agencies we see when they go to hydrogen, the first option is steam methane reformed hydrogen. What was the impetus for you to actually go into electrolytic hydrogen? Why did you choose that pathway?
The electrolyzer gave us the most control, I guess, over how the fuel was produced and where that energy was coming from, and we had this opportunity with this land across the street that we could build the solar array and have a direct connection, and so that's really what led us down that path. As we expand our fleet, we will consider other options, maybe delivery and other options. But that was sort of our decision-making process there.
Great. So I think we have understood a little bit about the technology and everything. Now we are getting into the next phase of the questions wherein people are wondering about the funding constraints, because you all highlighted, okay, funding is a major issue or a gap. So I do want to turn to you, Cliff, because some of our audience members are wondering, because you said hydrogen supply costs remain one of the biggest challenges. So if the government were to fund it, would you like it to be separated, so upfront cost for the capital expenditure, or do you want to have like a mix of capital funding support as well as operational funding support? Because operational costs are also high for hydrogen in most cases, particularly if you are looking at green hydrogen. How do you envision like a good program to fund looking like for hydrogen fuels and electric buses?
I think a mix of funding would be beneficial, of course. And you're right. The fuel. Right now, I still think that I'm leaning towards the operational cost for a hydrogen bus being lower than what we're paying now in a CNG. And again, it's the zero emission technology has less moving parts. So naturally, as a maintenance person, there's going to be a lower cost in anything that has less moving parts. Even our midlife to extend the life of that vehicle is much, much less than it is on a combustion engine vehicle. So I think that having a mix of capital and service funding would be very beneficial, because the big cost is really in the fuel. If you were to bring the price of the fuel down, you could bring a hydrogen at parity with CNG or even diesel.
Great, that's a great point. So if I were to come back to Canada, Erin, we got a recent funding announcement, but the program is still being developed. So I do want to ask you, what is your ideal, scenario for funding hydrogen fuel cell technology in Canada? Like, would you like it to be capital upfront, like a lump sum for capital expenditure, or do you want it to be divided between capital and operational expenditure? Because as Cliff pointed out, there are operational savings, but still the fuel cost is high, and because as you highlighted, you do not have a local supply chain in Winnipeg for your purposes yet, and you need to establish it with an indoor fueling station and an electrolyzer. Do you foresee any challenges with the split funding? What is the best module that you may want?
I guess it comes down to how you're designating the operational costs. So from capital side, that gets us the fuel on site right now. But capital costs that doesn't go to a transit agency might bring the cost of fuel down from a delivery model. So from our perspective, we need the operational costs lower. We have the advantage in Manitoba that we have very, very low cost hydroelectricity. So we're predicting we can make fuel pretty close to the cost of diesel, but we cannot get delivered fuel at the cost of diesel because everybody is making it and then marking it up. So by the time it gets to us, it's twice as expensive. So that's where it needs to come down. So whether it's a capital cost that helps bring the cost of fuel down, or a direct operational cost that helps us offset, I don't know that it really matters as long as the program is ultimately set up that it brings the cost of fuel down.
That is quite true. I do have a follow-up question, not related to the funding though, because Cliff highlighted how he is bringing in different technologies together to test it and to select the best option or a complementarity of solution. Because this diversified portfolio is something that we have been hearing all along today, and that is something that we do quite a bit at CUTRIC as well. So from your thought process, Erin, are you envisioning a fleet, a mixed fleet at Winnipeg, or do you want to go all hydrogen?
Well, right now we're looking at mixed fleet, but that's largely dependent on the cost of hydrogen. The cost of operating a battery electric bus is significantly lower, at least half the price of what it costs for fuel for hydrogen right now. So hydrogen we see as being a complementary technology to diesel. So, where our routes are long and, we need that extra range. If we can get a competitive solution with diesel, that makes that effective. And then we would make up the remainder of our fleet on those shorter runs and on our smaller buses with battery electric to get optimized cost savings. So right now, from a purely cost perspective, it's more like a 70% battery electric and 30% fuel cell for us. But like I said earlier, the operational challenges are what it's a little bit harder to quantify right now. So the fact that we have to change all of the way that we do our operations today to accommodate 3 to 4 hours of charging every night, or the fact we'd have to buy more buses to do en route charging, those are things that we're going to sort of solidify during our trial over the next 18 months to 24 months when we have the buses on the road. That could swing that mix up, more on the fuel cell side than the battery electric, and particular 60-foot buses are right now, it's probably more like a 50-50 split between fuel cell and battery electric when you just come to our range demands that we need for high frequency transit. So it's still a moving target, but I think we've recognized that hydrogen is definitely a solution for a good portion of our transit agency. And I know in California you have smaller transit agencies that can go, more that decision right away on what that is. But here in Canada, where we have bigger buses and we have 18 to 20-year lives, we have to consider. We're looking at more of a long-term planning than we're committed 100% to one technology today.
Great. That is an important insight there, Erin. Thank you. Speaking of this long-term planning, I do want to turn to you, Kristen, if you wouldn't mind telling me in terms of your experience. You went through this program, you decided to go hydrogen, and you are in the early stages of planning it out. From your experience, what do transit agencies in general need to address to better support fuel cell electric bus deployments in the next 24 to 36 months? If there are a few tips that you can offer.
So I think some of the things that we're looking at is trying to figure out fuel, as we've heard over and over again, where we're going to get it from. Can we partner with somebody? We're trying to look at partnering for some grants with the University of California, Riverside, who has a whole division on zero emission technologies and is very interested in doing fuel cell work and coming up with a clean hydrogen process. So that is one of the main things, I think, is having those conversations. We're starting to have conversations with our member jurisdictions about hydrogen fueling stations, where they're being put, if they're in places where we could access them, if we need to fuel as well. So starting to be part of the planning process for these zero emission buses. And I would just like to add that the rollout plan is a snapshot of where we are right now based on technologies right now in our huge service area, but certainly is something that we're going to have to revisit as technologies improve. And if battery electric buses in the future seem like they fit and they make sense from a financial perspective, then we would modify our rollout plan and add those in as well.
That's great to hear. So given that we have only a couple more minutes left, I do want to request a 20-second or a 30-second answer from you all. Funding gap is something that we highlighted. It's a real issue. There is a significant funding gaps, and money can resolve a lot of problems. But would money solve it all? So if we have funds, what is that we need in addition to money to ensure we are receiving the uptake that fuel cell electric buses deserve in North America. If I were to do a quick roundtable, 30 seconds, just a snippet answer from each one of you. Maybe I would start with you, Erin. Would you consider that question?
Like I said, if money will solve the supply chain issue, I'd say yes. The infrastructure side, the power side can be solved with delivered fuel. And if we invested the money in getting those hydrogen hubs, and particularly green hydrogen hubs, preferably, or blue in the worst case scenario for us, that I think that could really get more hydrogen buses on the road, because that's really the cost, and that if you can get the cost down and you can get supply chain up, I think adoption would go up as well.
Okay, great to hear that. Jane, could I turn to you? Would money solve it all?
I think what I'd like to add is just that education and awareness piece. In the US, and maybe I'll say outside of California, there is just all the talk is about battery electric. And I think that fuel cell electric buses are really in the shadow, and they can solve a lot of problems. They can solve the problems for a lot of agencies. So that's what I'd like to add.
Okay, great. Kristen, what would you like to say?
I think essentially I agree with Erin. If the money is invested in the right way to make sense for us transit agencies and to have, that those hubs where we can purchase hydrogen, I think that makes a lot of sense. In general, I think that there's also a political nature to all of this in California, and I don't think money will solve that issue. I think that's a much bigger issue and conversation. And there's people for this, and there's people for CNG, and so I don't think money will solve everything, but it certainly would help us to deploy the hydrogen technology and deploy it faster.
Great, thank you. Kristen or Cliff?
Okay, I'll be as brief as possible. I agree with everyone, and I think that if money was not an issue, we could solve the zero emission at the tailpipe. But I really like what Jane is doing, and I think that we need to think if money was not an issue, take a deeper dive and look at well to wheel and follow the source back to the very beginning and see if we can't make it true zero emission from well to wheel.
Great, thank you so much. We are at time, but I wish to thank all the panelists for sharing your valuable insights. I'm sure our audience would have enjoyed the session as well. This is transit agency solely, the transit agency perspective that we are getting from this particular panel. So thank you so much once again for sharing your insights. Truly, the fact of the matter is that we have the right leaders in the right place to do great things. That there are some barriers that we need to transcend. So thank you once again for sharing your insights and enlightening us all. Thank you to your audience for tuning into this particular sessions. I hope I was able to answer some of your questions, at least if not all. This is Parvati Pillai signing out from the first annual CEP Technology and Transit Operations Conference here at CUTRIC. Thank you so much.